Alright, this is our Unit 18 video lesson over photosynthesis. Make sure you're filling in the guided notes as you follow along, and you pause and rewatch any parts that you might be confused on if you need to. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's remember that plants are considered to be autotrophs, and that is a scientific word that we use to simply say that that is an organism that makes their own food. Okay, and it just so happens that plants are able to make their own food through the process of photosynthesis, which I'm sure you've learned a little bit about before. So we're going to review that and go into a little bit more detail than you've probably talked about before. In our previous unit, Unit 17, we talked about the 4 different tropisms that plants are able to do as they respond to their environment. And one of those tropisms, remember, was phototropism, which is when our plants are able to move and orientate themselves towards a source of light. And this is because of the need of light for plants to be able to do photosynthesis. So the top part of the leaf is actually designed to capture and absorb those sun rays. And we're going to talk about the leaf structure in just a moment. So the top part, our leaf, is where we are doing photosynthesis. That's the part of the plant that its job is simply to capture light and make sugars for the plant to use as energy. So sunlight collection is going to vary on different types of plants. So when we look around at our environment, we see plants of all different sizes and shapes, and different numbers of leaves, different shapes of leaves, and all of those have been adapted to their respective environments so they can do the best to capture the amount of sunlight so they can do this process of photosynthesis. Alright, so let's start off by labeling our leaf, and make sure you are labeling this on your guided notes as I label it on here. So this is like if this is a cross section of a leaf. So if I took a leaf and I cut out a tiny little square and we zoomed in really close and looked at it underneath a microscope, we would see something similar to this. Okay, so leaves are highly specialized organs of a plant that allow it to do photosynthesis. So if we're going to start from the top and work our way down, on the very top of our leaf, the part that captures the light is called the cuticle. Now the cuticle is a waxy covering that's going to be protecting the outside of the leaf and helping it to prevent losing lots of water. Directly underneath our cuticle is going to be our epidermis. Okay, we have an upper epidermis and a lower epidermis. These are just simply the cells that make up the outside of our plant. Directly underneath the epidermis are our palisade mesophyll cells. The palisade mesophyll cells, these are going to be where they are the most chloroplasts, and these are going to be the ones that are going to be doing the most processes of photosynthesis inside of these palisade mesophyll cells. Underneath our palisade mesophyll layer, we have our spongy mesophyll layer. So under our palisade mesophyll layer, we have our spongy mesophyll layer, which is going to also have chloroplasts that do photosynthesis. And remember, well, we'll talk about the structure of chloroplasts in just a second. Underneath that, we see in here we have these tubes. And these tubes are part of our vascular system. And our vascular system is made up of 2 types of vascular tissue called the xylem and the phloem. So we'll label our xylem first, if it will show up on the screen. Okay, so we have our xylem is our first type of vascular tissue. Remember, we learned that the xylem is what carries the water and nutrients up from the roots towards the leaves so that we have the reactants we need to do photosynthesis. The purple, underneath the xylem, we have the phloem, And remember, the phloem is what flows down, and it's what's going to carry our glucose or sugar that's produced as a product of photosynthesis down from the leaves to the rest of the plant. All right, we call this a vascular bundle, which would be our bundle sheath cells. So our vascular bundle is made up of our bundle sheath, is what surrounds our xylem and our phloem. You'll notice that there are some spaces inside of our leaf that don't have anything in them. These are air spaces. Okay, so these are going to be filled up with air, like specifically carbon dioxide and oxygen that we're going to be exchanging for photosynthesis during photosynthesis. This over here, on the bottom of all leaves, if you look very closely under a microscope, you're able to see the pores on the bottom. And these pores are called stomata. And stomata are able to, that's where we're going to be exchanging we're going to be bringing in CO2, right, and releasing oxygen. So this is where the oxygen produced as a product from photosynthesis will be released out of the plant. And this is super important for organisms like ourselves who rely on oxygen to actually be able to breathe and survive. Now the stomata don't want to stay open all the time because they can also lose water out of the stomata. So in order to control when the stomata are open and closed, we have cells on either side called guard cells, and they can open and close the stomata as the plant needs it to be opened or closed. Right, so these are the parts of the leaf, and you need to make sure that you're familiar with these and have these labeled because you will be doing an activity over this in the future. Right, now, we talked about specifically inside the leaf, there are chloroplasts in the palisade mesophyll cells and the spongy mesophyll cells. And this just happens to be the organelle that does photosynthesis. Okay, so yes, the leaf is the organ of the plant that's doing photosynthesis, but specifically it's happening in the organelle, the chloroplast. Okay, so let's label the parts of our chloroplast, because when we talk about the different stages of photosynthesis, you will need to know where these are actually occurring. So starting from the top, this is going to be simply called our outer membrane of our chloroplast. Underneath our outer membrane, we have our inner membrane. And inside of our chloroplast, we have this fluid, and the fluid is called the stroma. And you'll notice also these green little coin-like looking things that are stacked on top of each other inside of our chloroplast. And these are called thylakoids. And a stack of thylakoids has a special name called a granum, or grana for plural. So a stack of thylakoids is called a granum, and the plural is a grana. So this is the structure of our chloroplast. Now, a chloroplast actually appears green because of the pigment chlorophyll, which is actually present inside of our thylakoids. And our chlorophyll is what's going to capture the light energy from the sun or the light source that the plant is using as a light source for photosynthesis. So our chlorophyll is our light capturing pigment present inside of our thylakoid, and this is what makes the plant appear to be green. Alright, so here's our equation. Go ahead and make sure you write this down, and I will expect for you to have this memorized. So our equation is 6CO2. CO2 stands for carbon dioxide, plus 6 water plus light is going to give us, and our C6H12O6, this is our chemical formula for glucose plus oxygen. So oxygen is our 6O2. So you need to know and recognize that C6H12O6 means glucose. Okay, so make sure you have both the chemical equation written down as well as the word equation that would go with the equation. Okay, so photosynthesis actually has two separate parts. And the first part we call the light-dependent reactions. This means, like the name suggests, these reactions are depending on light. So if light is not present, then we can't do these reactions. So the light-dependent reactions are going to occur in the thylakoids of our chloroplast, okay, where the chlorophyll is. Remember, because we talked about the chlorophyll capturing the light energy. So what happens is light beams down on our plant, our chlorophyll accepts the light, absorbs the light energy, captures it. This causes water molecules to be split, which is going to end up producing the oxygen as a waste product. So the oxygen that's produced is not actually used by the plant. That's what's released out of the stomata and what we end up breathing in. So our light-dependent reactions is a series of reactions involving an electron transport chain, which we're not going to get into all the detail of how all of that works, but I just want to let you know that it is a very detailed process in how all of this happens. So the main purpose of our light-dependent reaction is to produce the ATP, which is a chemical form of energy. So we've taken our light energy and transformed it into a chemical energy that the cell can use. So we are producing ATP by combining ADP and a phosphate, because really the only difference is ADP is adenosine diphosphate, which means it has two phosphates attached to it. And so when we add another phosphate over here to it, that's going to give us an adenosine with three phosphates attached, which would then give us ATP, adenosine triphosphate, if this will show up on the screen. So all we're doing in the process to make ATP is adding a phosphate to our ADP, which produces our energy molecule called ATP. In addition, we're also going to be producing NADPH, which happens to be an electron carrier. Which is going to carry electrons from our light-dependent reactions to our next set of reactions called the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. Okay, so basically all we're doing in the light-dependent reactions is we are taking the energy from the sun, we're splitting water, releasing oxygen, and we're producing two of the reactants that we need for our light-dependent reactions, including ATP and NADPH. Okay, so here is a quick little diagram that is a good visual to see how all this is happening. So here we have our water coming in. Water is coming in to our plant. Remember, water is going to enter through the roots, and it's traveling up the xylem to our leaf. We have our light, which is being absorbed by our chlorophyll and our thylakoid. So these are our two reactants. So water and light would be our two reactants of our light-dependent reactions. Our products, we are going to be producing ATP, NADPH, and releasing oxygen. Okay, so our three products would be ATP, NADPH, and O2. And our two reactants would be water and light. Alright, so let's go into the light-independent reactions now. So as the name suggests, these reactions don't actually require light. They're going to take place in the stroma of the chloroplast, so in the fluid of the chloroplast. And what's going to happen is our carbon dioxide that is being brought into our plant through the stomata is going to be rearranged by an enzyme called rubisco to produce the glucose that the plant needs to use as food. Okay, so this is a very simplified version of what's happening, but this is all that you need, that you're going to be responsible for knowing. And I also want to remind you that this is going to be using the ATP and the NADPH that we produced in our light-dependent reactions to help do this process. A common misconception is that the glucose is made from water, but actually the glucose that is made in photosynthesis is made from the carbon dioxide that the plant takes in from the air. So essentially the plant is able to make sugars from thin air through the process of photosynthesis. Right, and remember again, these reactions, the light-independent reactions, we call the Calvin cycle, after the scientists who discovered them. After our glucose is made, we're going to transport that sugar product throughout the plant, remember, in our phloem, which is part of our vascular system. And that sugar is going to be used as energy, or it could be used to make new parts of the plant, new cells, or it could be stored in the plant for later use. Okay, so now I want to give an overview of what's happening, and I want you to make sure that you're drawing out this, what I'm drawing on the screen. So photosynthesis, this is a quick summary for you. We have two parts. We have our light dependent reactions, which I'm going to abbreviate LDR, and we have our light independent reactions, which I'm going to abbreviate LIR. So in our light dependent reactions, we have to have water and light as our two reactants. We're also going to need ADP plus a phosphate and NADP plus. So NADP plus is like the opposite of NADPH. Okay, so it's on one of our electron acceptors. Right, so these will be our reactants, and it's going to use these reactants to produce reactants. And so we're going to produce from this oxygen, okay, which is a waste product. And we're also going to produce NADPH and ATP. Okay, so NADPH and ATP are going to actually be used over here as reactants in our light independent reactions. So in our light independent reactions, we're going to need our CO2, which the plant brings in through the stomata. We're going to need our NADPH and our ATP, both of which came from our light-dependent reactions. And we're going to use these reactants to produce C6H12O6, which is our glucose, and we're also going to end up producing NADP plus and ADP plus a phosphate, which these two will go back over here and become reactants in our light-dependent reactions. So these are going to kind of cycle back and forth as they get used. The last thing I want to do is write out our equation so that we can write down where everything is coming and where everything is going. Alright, so we start off with our 6 CO2, or 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. So our 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, this is entering the plant through the stomata. So enters through the stomata, and it's going to be used in the light independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. Right? Next we have our 6 molecules of water. This enters through roots and travels up our xylem to our leaves. Okay, and this is going to be used in our light dependent reactions, the first set of reactions of photosynthesis. Our next reactant is light. Light is going to be absorbed by chlorophyll in the chloroplast, specifically the thylakoid of the plant. Right? In our products, all of this is going to produce C6H12O6. Okay, this is our glucose, and glucose is going to be produced in the light independent reactions. These are going, and this is going to be used by plant for energy. And remember, it's going to be traveling after it's produced. Our glucose travels in the phloem to wherever it's needed in the plant. Our last product that's produced in our equation is oxygen. Remember, oxygen is going to be produced as a waste product after we split the water molecule in our light dependent reactions. And it's going to be released out of the leaf through the stomata, which are those pores on the bottom of the leaf. And this is the same oxygen that you and I breathe in and helps us to sustain all of life on Earth. So this should be the end of our video. Make sure that you have submitted the question and that you get your notes checked off when you are asked to show them. And then you're going to complete your photosynthesis interactive notebooking and your leaf, parts of the leaf interactive notebooking as well.